The red polo shirt hung in my walk-in closet like a badge of shame, at least in my parents' eyes. Every Tuesday evening when I pulled it over my head, smoothing down the embroidered logo that read Marco's Pizzeria in cheerful yellow script, I could almost hear their collective sigh of disappointment echoing from 3 states away. The fabric was soft now, broken in by months of wear, but it still carried the weight of their expectations, or rather, their complete lack thereof. Maya Chen had always been the daughter who was supposed to make it. Valedictorian at 18, full scholarship to Northwestern, MBA by 25. The golden child who would finally validate her immigrant parents' sacrifice, their decades of 16-hour days running a small alterations shop in Chicago's Chinatown. Instead, here she was at 28, pulling on a pizza delivery uniform in her downtown Los Angeles apartment, preparing for another night of what her mother had taken to calling that embarrassing phase you're going through. The apartment itself told a different story, though my parents had never seen it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, hardwood floors that gleamed like honey in the afternoon sun, a kitchen island bigger than their entire living room back home. But they didn't know about any of that. All they knew was that their daughter delivered pizza for a living, and the shame of it had become a third member of every family phone call. Maya beta, my mother would say, in that particular tone that somehow managed to be both loving and devastatingly disappointed. Your cousin Jenny just got promoted to senior associate at her law firm. She's buying a house in Naperville. Maybe you should think about coming home, getting a real job. This pizza thing, she would trail off, as if the words themselves were too painful to complete. My father was more direct, as always. I didn't work every day for 30 years so you could throw away your education driving around with boxes of cheese bread. The hurt in his voice was worse than any anger could have been. Every Tuesday night that I slipped into that red polo shirt, I wasn't just another minimum wage worker trying to make rent. I owned a chain of successful pizzerias across Southern California. But the uniform was my disguise, my way of staying connected to the ground level of the business I'd built from nothing. It had started 5 years ago with a single food truck and a dream that seemed impossibly naive now. Fresh out of business school, drowning in student loans, I'd used the last of my savings to buy a decrepit Chevy van and convert it into a mobile pizzeria. Maya's Mobile Pies. The name still made me cringe a little, but it was honest. Just me, a portable oven, and an unshakable belief that I could make pizza better than anyone else in the city. The first year was brutal. 18-hour days, burns up and down my arms from the oven, falling asleep in the driver's seat more nights than I cared to remember. My parents thought I'd lost my mind, trading a promising career in corporate consulting for what they saw as elaborate unemployment. "You have an MBA," my mother would cry during our weekly phone calls. "Why are you playing with food?" But I wasn't playing. I was learning every aspect of the business from the inside out. How long it took to hand-toss dough until it was perfectly thin but not fragile, which neighborhoods ordered the most on rainy Tuesday nights, how to smile at a customer who was having the worst day of their life and somehow make their evening a little brighter with nothing but a hot pizza and genuine care. The breakthrough came in year 2. A food blogger stumbled across my truck parked outside a college campus and wrote a review that went viral overnight. Maya's Mobile Pies isn't just serving pizza, she's serving joy with a side of artisanal perfection. This is what happens when MBA-level business acumen meets genuine passion for craft. Orders tripled within a week. The success was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But with each expansion, I felt myself getting further away from the core of what had made it all work in the first place. The direct connection with customers, the immediate feedback, the pure satisfaction of watching someone's face light up when they tasted something truly exceptional. That's why I work delivery shifts, to stay connected to the heart of what I'd built. My parents thought it was evidence of my complete lack of ambition. Still delivering pizzas, I see, my father had said during our last conversation 3 weeks ago. His voice carried the particular flatness that comes from years of accumulated disappointment. Maya, you're almost 30. When are you going to grow up and get serious about your future? I'd been standing in my office, looking out at the city where my restaurants were busy with the dinner rush when he said those words. The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. Instead, I'd felt that familiar twist in my stomach, the one that came from being simultaneously proud of everything I'd accomplished and heartbroken that the people who mattered most couldn't see any of it. Tonight was Tuesday again, which meant it was uniform time. I selected a location I hadn't visited in a while, the Westwood shop near UCLA, always busy with college students who appreciated both quality and value. As I tied my hair back and grabbed my car keys, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. Just another pizza delivery girl, nothing special to look at. My parents would have seen exactly what they expected to see. Their daughter still playing dress-up in a job that was beneath her education and their sacrifices. What they couldn't see was the quiet confidence in my eyes, the way I carried myself like someone who had built something meaningful from scratch. They couldn't see the stack of lease agreements on my desk for the next wave of expansion, or the business plan for going nationwide that kept me up at night with excitement rather than worry. They couldn't see that every time I put on this uniform, I wasn't stepping down. I was stepping into the heart of everything I'd created. The drive to Westwood took me through neighborhoods where 3 of my other locations were busy with the dinner rush. I could have stopped at any of them, could have walked in as the owner and been greeted with the kind of respect that comes with signing paychecks. Instead, I pulled up to the Westwood location like any other delivery driver, reporting for a shift, ready to spend the evening doing exactly what my parents thought was a waste of my life. The manager, Jessica, greeted me with a smile and handed me the night's delivery schedule. She knew who I really was, of course, but she also understood the importance of these undercover shifts. "Busy night ahead," she said, treating me exactly like any other part-time driver. Got a big order for a sorority house and 3 separate deliveries to the same apartment complex. You ready for this? I was more than ready. I was home. The first delivery of the night was to a graduate student who answered the door in pajama pants and a stress-wrinkled t-shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw the pizza, his whole face transformed. "Oh my God, you're a lifesaver," he said, and I could tell he meant it literally. "I've been working on my dissertation for 14 hours straight. This might be the first real food I've eaten all day." That moment, that pure, uncomplicated gratitude for something as simple as hot food delivered to your door, was why I did this. Not for the money, though the business was more profitable than my parents could have imagined. Not for the recognition, though the industry awards were starting to pile up. I did it for moments like this, when something I'd built from nothing could make someone's impossible day just a little bit better. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the phone call I'd have with my parents this weekend. The same disappointed questions, the same gentle suggestions that I consider real career opportunities, the same unspoken wondering about where they'd gone wrong with their daughter. But tonight, I was just Maya the delivery driver, carrying boxes of carefully crafted pizza through the streets of Los Angeles, building something bigger than they could see, one satisfied customer at a time. When they called to check in, as they did every Sunday evening without fail, I would sit in my penthouse apartment and tell them about my delivery shifts while looking out at a city where my restaurants fed thousands of families every night. "How was work this week, Beta?" my mother would ask, and I could hear her folding laundry in the background, the same ritual she'd maintained for 30 years. The question was innocent enough, but it landed like a stone in my chest every time. "Oh, busy Tuesday night," I'd say, which was technically true. I had worked Tuesday night, driving through Westwood with pizza boxes in my backseat. I just didn't mention that I owned every box, every recipe, every decision that went into making those deliveries possible. My father would usually take the phone next, his voice carrying that particular mixture of love and disappointment that had become our family's signature sound. "Any thoughts about using that expensive education we paid for?"
he'd ask, and I would close my eyes and try not to think about the business degree hanging on my office wall, or the strategic planning sessions I'd led that morning, or the franchise proposals sitting on my desk from investors in 3 different states. I'm learning a lot, I'd tell him, which was also true. I was learning every day. I was learning that success, without the ability to share it, was its own kind of failure. I was learning that building something meaningful was only half the victory if the people you loved most couldn't see what you'd built. I was learning that sometimes the cost of protecting someone's feelings was your own sense of identity. But I couldn't tell them. Not yet, because I knew my parents. Knew them with the deep, complicated intimacy that comes from being the child of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for a better life. I knew that if I told them I was successful, really successful, they would immediately assume I was lying to make them feel better. They would think I was spinning elaborate fantasies to avoid admitting I'd failed, the way their friend Mrs. Kim's son had done when he'd claimed to be working in international consulting while actually struggling to find any work at all. My parents had heard too many stories from their generation, tales of children who'd promised success but delivered only disappointment and elaborate excuses. They'd seen too many families torn apart by the gap between immigrant dreams and American realities. Better, they would think, for me to have a humble job than to be caught in delusions of grandeur. So I let them believe I was their disappointing daughter, the one who had somehow squandered every opportunity they'd provided. It was a sacrifice I told myself was temporary, but as months turned to years, I began to wonder if I was protecting them or punishing myself. When the Los Angeles Business Journal wanted to do a cover story about my expansion strategy, I insisted they use my middle name, Elizabeth, instead of Maya, just in case somehow, impossibly, a copy made its way to my parents' corner of Chicago. At work, I was Maya Elizabeth Chen, the confident CEO who could walk into a room full of investors and command their attention with quarterly projections and 5-year growth plans. I wore tailored suits and gave presentations about market penetration and brand recognition. I made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and thousands of customers. I was respected, successful, accomplished in every measurable way. But on Sunday evenings, I became Maya the disappointment, Maya the pizza delivery girl who couldn't seem to get her life together despite every advantage she'd been given. I would pace around my apartment during those phone calls, looking at the evidence of my success, the awards on my shelf, the business magazines with my photo, the architectural plans for new locations, while discussing the fictional struggles of my imaginary minimum wage existence. The psychological toll was becoming unbearable. I started having dreams where I was trapped in my red polo shirt, unable to take it off, unable to explain to anyone who I really was. I would wake up in a cold sweat, reaching for my phone to call my parents and tell them everything, then remember that it was 3 a.m. and they would be asleep in their modest bedroom above the alterations shop, dreaming their own dreams about their daughter who had somehow lost her way. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon in October. I was in my office, reviewing contracts for a potential expansion into the San Francisco market, when my assistant knocked on my door with an unusual expression on her face. "Maya, there's a call for you on line 3. The woman says she's your mother, and she sounds upset." My heart stopped. My mother never called during work hours. Never. She respected boundaries to a fault, never wanting to interfere with what she assumed was my precarious employment situation. For her to call in the middle of the afternoon meant something was seriously wrong. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers. "Mom, what's happening? Is Dad okay?" Her voice was thick with tears, but not the kind that came from grief. These were tears of frustration, of accumulated worry that had finally overflowed. "Maya, I just got off the phone with Auntie Susan. She was asking about you, about how you're doing, and I had to tell her that my brilliant daughter, my MBA daughter, is still delivering pizzas at 28 years old." I sank into my chair, looking out at the city skyline while my mother's pain traveled across 2,000 miles to find me. Mom, she continued, and I could hear her walking around their small apartment, probably wringing her hands the way she did when she was truly distressed. Do you know how that feels? To watch other parents talk about their children's promotions, their children's houses, their children's marriages, while I have to explain that mine is, what, spinning her wheels? Wasting her education? I don't even know how to describe it anymore. The words hit me like physical blows. I was sitting in an office that overlooked half of Los Angeles, surrounded by the fruits of more success than most people achieve in a lifetime, listening to my mother cry because she thought I was a failure. The irony was so painful, it was almost absurd.
"I'm not wasting anything," I said quietly, but the words felt hollow even to me. How could I explain that I wasn't wasting my education when I couldn't explain what I was actually doing with it? "Then what are you doing?" she asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. "Maya, you have so much potential. You always have. Even when you were little, you saw possibilities that other people missed. You had plans, dreams, ambition. What happened to all of that?" I closed my eyes and thought about the little girl she was remembering, the one who had set up elaborate business schemes in our backyard, selling lemonade and cookies with the kind of systematic approach that made adults shake their heads in amazement. The one who had written detailed business plans for her high school projects, complete with market research and financial projections. The one who had promised her parents that their sacrifices would mean something, that their daughter would achieve things they had never been able to imagine. That little girl had grown up and done exactly what she'd promised. She had built something extraordinary from nothing. She had taken every lesson they'd taught her about hard work and persistence and turned them into a thriving business that employed hundreds of people and brought joy to thousands of customers every day. But none of that mattered if her parents couldn't see it. "I haven't given up on anything," I said, and for the first time in years, I let a hint of my real confidence creep into my voice. "Mom, I need you to trust me. I know this doesn't look like what you expected, but I'm building something important." "Building what?" she asked, and I could hear the desperate hope in her voice, the desire to believe that her daughter wasn't as lost as she seemed. "Maya, talk to me. Help me understand." And for a moment, I almost did. The words were right there, ready to spill out in a rush of relief and revelation. I almost told her about the restaurants, about the employees who depended on me, about the recognition and awards and expansion plans. I almost ended 3 years of careful deception with one moment of honesty. But then I heard my father's voice in the background, asking who was on the phone, and my mother's hesitant response. "It's Maya. She says she's building something." The skepticism in her tone, the way she said, "she says," as if she was already preparing for another disappointment, stopped me cold. They weren't ready. Not yet. They had been hurt too many times by promises that hadn't materialized, by dreams that had turned into excuses. If I told them now, while they were in the middle of worrying about my apparent failure, they would assume I was fabricating success to ease their concerns. They would think I was lying to protect their feelings, the way troubled children sometimes do when the truth becomes too painful to share. I needed to show them, not tell them. I needed them to discover the truth in a way that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I needed them to see with their own eyes what I had built, to understand that their daughter hadn't wasted their sacrifices, but had actually multiplied them into something they could be proud of. "Trust me, Mom," I said again, and this time I made it a promise. "Just give me a little more time. I know it's hard to understand right now, but everything is going to make sense soon." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could imagine her sitting at their small kitchen table, probably staring at the framed photo of my college graduation that still held the place of honor next to the window. "How much more time, Maya? We're not getting any older, and we just want to know that you're going to be okay." 2 weeks, I said, surprising myself with the specificity. Give me 2 weeks and I promise you'll understand everything. After we hung up, I sat in my office as the afternoon shadows grew longer, thinking about promises and timing and the weight of secrets that had grown too heavy to carry alone. 2 weeks. I had given myself a deadline without knowing exactly how I would meet it, but something about saying it out loud had made it real.
I pulled out my phone and made a call that I'd been putting off for months. David, it's Maya. I think it's time we moved forward with the Chicago expansion. But I want to do it differently than we planned. I want to do it personally. The next 2 weeks would either heal the rift between me and my parents or make it permanent. But I couldn't carry the weight of this secret anymore. It was time for them to know who their daughter really was, even if the truth was more surprising than anything they could have imagined. As I looked out at the city where my restaurants were preparing for the dinner rush, I made a decision that had been 3 years in the making. In 2 weeks, I would stop being two different people. In 2 weeks, Maya the disappointment and Maya the success would finally become the same person. And for the first time in years, the thought of a Sunday evening phone call with my parents didn't make my stomach twist with anxiety. Instead, it made me smile. The 2-week deadline I'd given myself suddenly felt impossibly short and infinitely long at the same time. Every morning I woke up with the weight of that promise pressing against my chest, and every evening I went to bed wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But there was no turning back now. The Chicago expansion was in motion, and with it, the end of the careful deception that had defined my relationship with my parents for 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to reveal my success by returning to the city where I'd first learned to hide my ambitions. Growing up in Chinatown, I'd watched my parents navigate a world that seemed designed to keep them small. They'd learned to be grateful for steady work, modest success, and the kind of invisible respectability that didn't draw unwanted attention. Dreams were dangerous things in their experience. The bigger you reached, the harder you could fall, and the fall could take your whole family with you. But I had inherited their work ethic along with their caution. And somehow I'd managed to transform their careful pragmatism into something they wouldn't recognize. While they'd taught me to be satisfied with enough, I'd learned to define enough as something much larger than they'd ever imagined possible. The Chicago location was going to be different from any of my other restaurants. Instead of the casual neighborhood spots I'd built in Los Angeles, this would be a flagship. 3 stories, rooftop dining, a demonstration kitchen where customers could watch their pizzas being made. It would be impossible to miss, impossible to dismiss as just another pizza place. It would be a monument to everything I'd accomplished, sitting 6 blocks from the alteration shop where my parents spent their days hemming pans and taking in waistbands, never knowing that their daughter's empire was growing just down the street. David thought I was making an emotional decision rather than a business one, and he wasn't entirely wrong. Maya, we could put the flagship in Lincoln Park or River North, he'd argued during our planning session. Better demographics, higher visibility, more foot traffic. Why Chinatown? Because my parents walk past that corner every day on their way to the grocery store, I thought, but didn't say. Because I need them to see it before I tell them about it. Because after 3 years of hiding, I need the truth to be so obvious they can't pretend it isn't real. Market research shows there's an underserved population there, I said instead, which was also true, and the rent is more reasonable than the trendy neighborhoods. It's a smart business decision. What I didn't tell him was that I had been having nightmares about the reveal conversation. In my dreams, I would sit my parents down and explain everything, the success, the restaurants, the years of deception, and they would look at me with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than any anger. They would ask me why I had lied to them, why I'd let them worry, why I'd chosen to hurt them with my silence. And in those dreams, I never had a good answer. The flagship would be my answer. Not words that could be doubted or dismissed, but 3 stories of brick-and-mortar proof that their daughter hadn't wasted their sacrifices. It would speak louder than any explanation I could give. But first, I had to get through the next 2 weeks without losing my mind. The pressure started immediately. The Sunday after I'd made my promise to my mother, she called with an agenda. Maya, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I want you to know that your father and I have decided to help. My heart sank. Help with what, Mom?
We're going to pay for you to go back to school. Get your MBA again, or maybe a different graduate degree. Something practical. We've been saving money, and we think this is the right time to invest in your future. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by architectural plans for the Chicago restaurant, and the absurdity of the moment was overwhelming. My parents wanted to spend their retirement savings to help me get the education I'd already used to build a multi-million-dollar business. They wanted to rescue me from the life they thought I was trapped in, never knowing that I was exactly where I'd chosen to be. Mom, that's incredibly generous, but I don't need— You do need it, she interrupted, and there was a firmness in her voice I hadn't heard since I was a teenager trying to skip piano lessons. Maya, you're smart enough to know that delivering pizza isn't a career. It's a job you take while you're figuring out your real career. But you've been figuring for 3 years now, and we can't watch you waste any more time. The word waste hit me like a slap. Everything I'd built, every risk I'd taken, every success I'd achieved, in their eyes, it was all a waste because they couldn't see it. The injustice of it made my chest tight with frustration. What if I told you I was happy? I asked, testing the waters. Happiness doesn't pay rent. My father's voice came from the background, and I could tell he'd been listening to the whole conversation. Maya, your mother and I didn't work our whole lives so you could be happy delivering pizza. We worked so you could have choices, opportunities, a future that's bigger than ours. But you have to want those things too. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I had built a future bigger than anything they'd imagined, that I was employing people and creating opportunities and making a difference in ways they couldn't comprehend. Instead, I heard myself saying, just give me the 2 weeks I asked for, please. After that, if you still think I need to change direction, we can talk about it. 2 weeks, my mother repeated, and I could hear the skepticism in her voice. Maya, what can possibly change in 2 weeks? Everything, I thought. Absolutely everything. But the conversation stayed with me, gnawing at my confidence as I threw myself into the Chicago project with desperate intensity. I flew back and forth between Los Angeles and Chicago 4 times in 10 days, overseeing every detail of the renovation, every aspect of the staff training, every element of the marketing campaign. I was running on caffeine and anxiety, driven by the need to make this restaurant so undeniably successful that my parents would have to see it as more than just another pizza place. The staff I'd hired in Chicago were young and enthusiastic, mostly recent graduates who reminded me of myself 5 years earlier, hungry for opportunity and willing to work harder than anyone expected. During training sessions, I found myself giving speeches that sounded more like therapy sessions than business meetings. This isn't just about pizza, I told them during one particularly intense day of preparation. This is about proving that you can build something meaningful from the ground up. It's about showing the world that young people with good ideas and strong work ethics can create jobs and serve their communities and make their families proud. Every pizza that leaves this kitchen is a statement about what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations. My assistant manager, a 24-year-old named Kevin, who had graduated from Northwestern with a business degree he wasn't sure how to use, raised his hand tentatively. Miss Chen, are you okay? You seem really intense about this opening. I looked around the room at their concerned faces and realized I was projecting my own fears onto them. They were excited about their new jobs, eager to learn the systems and techniques that had made my other locations successful. They didn't need to carry the weight of my family drama. Sorry, I said, forcing a smile. I guess I'm more nervous about this opening than usual. This location means a lot to me personally.
What I didn't tell them was that 3 days earlier, I'd driven past my parents' shop and seen my mother through the window, bent over a sewing machine in the dim afternoon light. She'd looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, and for a moment, I'd wanted to run inside and tell her everything. Instead, I sat in my rental car and watched her work, thinking about all the times she'd stayed late to finish alterations so she could afford my piano lessons, my school supplies, my college application fees.
The weight of that sacrifice had followed me everywhere since then. Every decision I made about the restaurant felt magnified by the knowledge that in a few days, my parents would walk past this building and see their daughter's name on the sign. Would they be proud? Or would they be hurt that I'd hidden so much from them for so long? The crisis came, as crises often do, at the worst possible moment. It was Thursday morning, 5 days before the scheduled opening, and I was in Chicago putting the final touches on staff training when my phone rang with a call from Los Angeles. It was David, and his voice carried the kind of tension that makes your stomach drop before you even know what's wrong. Maya, we have a problem, a big one. I stepped away from the training session and found a quiet corner of the restaurant. What kind of problem? Food poisoning. 12 people, all from the Manhattan Beach location. They all ate there Tuesday night, and now they're in the hospital with severe gastrointestinal distress. The health department is launching an investigation, and Channel 7 is running the story on tonight's news. The blood drained from my face. In the restaurant business, a food poisoning outbreak isn't just a crisis. It's an existential threat. One bad news cycle could destroy years of careful reputation building. Insurance would cover the medical bills, but trust, once lost, was almost impossible to rebuild. How bad is it? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the tone of his voice. Bad. Really bad. And Maya, there's something else. The reporter who's covering the story did some digging into the business ownership. They know you own all the locations. Your name is going to be all over the news tonight connected to this story. My legs gave out, and I sank into one of the dining chairs that had been delivered that morning. After 3 years of carefully protecting my privacy, my parents were going to learn about my business empire through a news report about a food poisoning outbreak. Instead of pride and celebration, there would be association with sickness and failure. Can we control the narrative at all? I asked, though I knew it was a futile question. I've got our PR team working on it, but you know how these things go. The damage story gets more attention than the correction. Maya, I think you need to come back to LA immediately. I looked around the Chicago restaurant, at the staff members who were practicing their customer service scripts, at the beautiful space that was supposed to be my gift to my parents, my proof that their daughter had made something of herself. Instead, it was going to open in the shadow of a scandal that would probably destroy everything I'd built. I can't leave, I said. The opening is in 5 days. These people are depending on me. The whole business is depending on you right now, David shot back. Maya, this could be the end of everything. You need to be here, managing this crisis, not playing restaurant manager in Chicago. He was right, and we both knew it. But the thought of abandoning the Chicago opening, of disappointing the staff I'd hired and trained, of missing the chance to reveal my success to my parents in the way I'd planned, it felt like admitting defeat before the battle was even over. Give me until tomorrow morning. I need to see if I can salvage something here, and then I'll fly back. Maya, 24 hours, David. I need 24 hours. After I hung up, I sat in the empty restaurant and tried to process what was happening. Everything was falling apart at once, and the timing couldn't have been worse. In 5 days, my parents would walk past this building and see my name associated with a business that had poisoned 12 people. Instead of pride, there would be shame. Instead of celebration, there would be crisis management and damage control. I called the one person who might understand what I was going through.
Jenny, I said when my cousin answered the phone. Jenny Liu was the success story of our extended family, the lawyer my mother was always comparing me to, the daughter who had followed the traditional path to respectability and achievement. Maya, what a surprise. How are you doing? Not great, I said, and before I knew it, the whole story was pouring out of me. The business, the deception, the Chicago restaurant, the food poisoning outbreak, the impossible timing of everything falling apart just as I was finally ready to tell the truth. Jenny listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Maya, I have to ask, why didn't you tell them sooner? Why let them worry for 3 years? It was the question I'd been asking myself, and I still didn't have a good answer. Because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Because I thought they'd assume I was lying to make them feel better. Because I wanted to be absolutely sure I could sustain the success before I claimed it. And now? Now, I don't know if there's going to be anything left to sustain. Maya, listen to me. I've been the family success story for 10 years now, and I can tell you something that might surprise you. Every single one of our relatives, including your parents, talks about how proud they are of your courage. I laughed bitterly. My courage to waste my MBA on pizza delivery? Your courage to chase something that mattered to you instead of taking the safe path. Your courage to build something from nothing, even when everyone around you thought you were making a mistake. Do you think they don't see that? Do you think they're not proud of you for following your dreams, even if they don't understand what those dreams are? They said I was wasting my life. They said that because they love you and they're scared for your future. But Maya, they raised you. They know who you are. Deep down, they know you're not the kind of person who would actually waste 3 years of her life. They're worried about you, but they also trust you more than you realize. Even if that's true, I said, it doesn't solve my current problem. By tomorrow night, they're going to see their daughter's name in the news connected to a food poisoning scandal. How do I explain that? The same way you explain everything else, Jenny said simply, with the truth. All of it. The success, the restaurants, the years of building something amazing, and yes, the crisis too. Because this is what real business owners do, Maya. They solve problems and take responsibility and fight for what they've built. Your parents will understand that, even if they don't understand pizza. After we hung up, I looked around the restaurant one more time. In 36 hours, assuming I could keep the opening on schedule, despite the crisis in Los Angeles, this place would be full of customers trying my food and deciding whether the Chen family daughter had built something worth supporting. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to David, telling him I would be back in Los Angeles first thing Saturday morning, after the Chicago opening. The second was to my parents. Mom, it's Maya. I need to ask you and Dad to do something for me. Of course, Beta. What do you need? Tomorrow night, I need you both to watch Channel 7 News. There's going to be a story about my work. And after you watch it, I need you to call me. We're going to have a long conversation about some things I should have told you a long time ago. Maya, you're scaring me. What kind of story? The kind that's going to explain everything. Mom, I want you to remember that whatever you see on the news, whatever questions it raises, I love you and Dad more than anything in the world. And everything I've done because you taught me that work is dignity and that building something meaningful is worth any sacrifice. Maya, just watch the news, Mom, and then call me. I promise everything will make sense after that. As I hung up, I realized that the crisis had solved one problem as it created a dozen others. I no longer had to figure out how to reveal my success to my parents. The news would do that for me, in the most dramatic and terrifying way possible. Now all I had to do was make sure there was still a business worth being proud of when the dust settled.
The next 18 hours would determine whether I was a successful entrepreneur who could weather a crisis or just another dreamer who had built something too fragile to survive the real world. Either way, by Saturday morning, my parents would know exactly who their daughter really was. Whether they would still be proud of her remained to be seen. Friday morning arrived with the kind of gray, heavy sky that seemed to mirror my emotional state. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between crisis management calls with my Los Angeles team and obsessive final preparations for the Chicago opening. By 6 a.m., I was standing in the empty restaurant, watching the sunrise paint the windows gold,
while trying to convince myself that everything wasn't falling apart at once. The health department investigation was moving faster than we'd hoped, but not in a good way. 3 more people had come forward claiming illness after eating at the Manhattan Beach location, and while our insurance investigators suspected at least 2 of them were opportunistic rather than legitimate, the media didn't care about such distinctions. Marco's Pizzeria poisoning count rises to 15 was already trending on social media, accompanied by photos of ambulances and speculation about corporate cover-ups. Kevin arrived early, as he had every day since starting work, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of determined expression that reminded me why I'd hired him. "Miss Chen, I know yesterday was rough, but I wanted you to know that the whole team is behind you. We've been following the news and we think it's unfair how they're portraying the situation." I accepted the coffee gratefully, touched by his loyalty, but also worried about what I was dragging these young people into. "Kevin, I need to be honest with you about something. This opening might be more complicated than any of us anticipated. If any of you want to look for other jobs while this situation plays out, I'll understand completely." He shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, with respect, we didn't sign up to work for a restaurant chain. We signed up to work for you. The way you've trained us, the standards you've set, the vision you have for what this place can be, that doesn't change because of some crisis in Los Angeles. If anything, it makes us want to prove that your way of doing business is the right way." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Channel 7 moved the story to tonight's 6 p.m. broadcast. "Your parents are going to see this in 10 hours. Are you sure you're ready?" I wasn't ready. I would never be ready for my parents to learn about my success through a news report about food poisoning. But ready or not, the moment was coming, and all I could do was try to control what I could control. "Kevin, I need to make some calls. Can you handle the prep meeting with the kitchen staff?" "Absolutely. But Miss Chen, whatever happens with the news tonight, we're going to make this opening perfect. Your Chicago location is going to be so good that people won't be able to ignore it." As he walked away, I felt a surge of fierce protectiveness for these employees who believed in me despite everything. They deserved better than to have their new jobs overshadowed by a crisis they had nothing to do with. They deserved the kind of leader who could protect them from the storms of the business world, not drag them into the eye of the hurricane. I spent the next several hours juggling phone calls between my crisis management team in Los Angeles and the final preparations in Chicago. Every conversation seemed to bring new complications. The health department had expanded their investigation to include 2 other Marco's locations, even though there was no evidence of problems at those sites. Our insurance company was pushing us to consider temporarily closing all California locations until the investigation was complete. The food distributor that supplied our signature sauce was threatening to terminate our contract to protect their own reputation. But the worst call came at 2 p.m., just as I was reviewing the evening's opening ceremony plans. "Maya, it's David. We have a problem that's bigger than the food poisoning." I closed my eyes, not sure I could handle another crisis. "What now?" I just got off the phone with our accountant. The combination of the health department investigation, the potential lawsuits, and the insurance complications, we're looking at a cash flow crisis. If we have to close the California locations for more than a week, we might not have enough liquid capital to cover payroll and rent across all 17 locations. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I'd been so focused on the reputational damage that I hadn't fully considered the financial implications. A business can recover from bad publicity, but it can't recover from bankruptcy. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "If everything goes wrong, we could lose everything within a month. If we can contain the crisis quickly and get the locations reopened, we'll be fine. But Maya, the margin for error is gone. Every decision we make from here on out could be the difference between survival and total failure." I looked around the Chicago restaurant, at the beautiful space I'd created to show my parents what I'd accomplished, and realized that by tomorrow, it might all be meaningless. Not because the food poisoning had destroyed my reputation, but because it had exposed how precarious even successful businesses could be when faced with the perfect storm of bad luck and timing. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, you need to get back here immediately. I know the Chicago opening is important to you personally, but if we lose the core business, there won't be anything left to expand." "I can't leave, David. Not today. Not when everything is about to come out." "Maya, think about this rationally. You've got 20 employees in Chicago who are going to be out of jobs if the parent company goes under. You've got 300 employees across California who are depending on you to save their livelihoods. Your personal family drama cannot be the priority right now." He was right, and it made me furious. Not at him, but at the universe that had conspired to make the most important personal moment of my life collide with the biggest professional crisis I'd ever faced. There was no good choice. Either I abandoned the Chicago opening and disappointed everyone who is counting on me here, or I stayed and potentially watched my entire business empire collapse from 2,000 miles away. I made the only decision I could live with. Give me until 8 p.m. Chicago time. The opening ceremony starts at 6, which means I can watch the news report with my parents at 6, handle the initial aftermath, oversee the first hour of service, and then catch a red-eye flight back to LA. I'll be in the office by 7 a.m. Saturday morning. Maya. David, I've spent 3 years building this company, and I've never asked for anything that wasn't in the best interest of the business. I'm asking for 4 hours. 4 hours to be present for the moment that defines whether my relationship with my parents survives this crisis. After that, I'm yours completely until we solve this. There was a long pause. 4 hours. But Maya, if anything changes, if the situation gets worse while you're playing restaurant host, you need to be on the next plane out, regardless of what's happening with your family. Agreed. As I hung up, I realized that the stakes had just gotten infinitely higher. It wasn't just about revealing my success to my parents anymore. It was about whether there would be any success left to reveal. In 4 hours, they would learn that their daughter was either a brilliant entrepreneur who had built something extraordinary, or a cautionary tale about dreams that grew too big, too fast, and collapsed under their own weight. The afternoon passed in a blur of final preparations, nervous energy, and constant phone updates from Los Angeles. At 4 p.m., I gathered the staff for a final meeting that felt more like a pep talk before a championship game than a restaurant opening briefing. "I'm not going to lie to you," I told them, looking at their young, eager faces. "Tonight is going to be challenging for all of us. Some of you have probably seen the news about our Los Angeles locations, and you might be wondering what that means for this restaurant and your jobs here." A few heads nodded. They'd been professional enough not to bring it up directly, but I could see the concern in their eyes. Here's what I can tell you. This business was built on the principle that if you do good work, treat customers with respect, and never compromise on quality, you can weather any storm. Tonight, we're going to prove that principle is true. We're going to serve the best pizza in Chicago. We're going to take care of every single customer who walks through that door. And we're going to show the city what Marco's Pizzeria is really about. Kevin raised his hand tentatively. "Miss Chen, are we going to be okay? I mean, as a company?" It was a fair question, and they deserved an honest answer. "I don't know," I said. "The next few weeks are going to determine whether this company survives and thrives, or whether it becomes a cautionary tale about dreams that grew too big, too fast, and collapsed under their own weight." At 5:30 p.m., I stepped outside the restaurant to call my parents one more time before the news broke. The Chicago evening was crisp and clear, and I could see people starting to gather across the street, drawn by the grand opening signs and the smell of fresh pizza drifting from our kitchen. "Mom, it's me. Are you and Dad going to watch the news at 6?
Yes, we're ready. Maya, I have to say, this is very mysterious. Your father has been worried all day that you're in some kind of trouble. If only you knew, I thought. I'm not in trouble exactly, but the story you're going to see is going to raise some questions. And I want you to know that I'm prepared to answer all of them. After the news, I'll call you and explain everything. Everything? Everything, Mom, including some things I should have told you a long time ago. As I hung up, I saw David calling again, but I let it go to voicemail. Whatever crisis had erupted in Los Angeles in the last 30 minutes would have to wait. In 25 minutes, my parents would turn on their television and see their daughter's name connected to a business empire they never knew existed. In 30 minutes, customers would start walking into the restaurant I'd built to prove to them that their sacrifices hadn't been wasted. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I'd hidden and protected and dreamed about was about to be tested in the most public and terrifying way possible. I walked back into the restaurant where my staff was making final preparations for the opening. The dining room looked perfect. Warm lighting, fresh flowers on every table, the open kitchen gleaming and ready for service. It was exactly what I'd envisioned when I first decided to expand to Chicago, exactly the kind of place that would make my parents proud. Whether I would still own it by the end of the week remained to be seen. At 5:55 p.m., I found myself standing at the hostess station, watching the second hand on my watch tick toward the moment when everything would change. In 5 minutes, my parents would learn the truth about their daughter's life. In 10 minutes, customers would start arriving for our grand opening. In 4 hours, I would be on a plane back to Los Angeles, fighting to save everything I'd built from complete collapse. But for now, in these last few moments before the storm truly hit, I allowed myself to feel proud of what I'd accomplished. Whatever happened next, I had built something meaningful from nothing. I had created jobs and served communities and turned my parents' lessons about hard work and dignity into a business that mattered. The clock hit 6 p.m., and somewhere in a small apartment above an alteration shop in Chinatown, my parents turned on their television to learn who their daughter really was. I couldn't bring myself to watch the broadcast. Instead, I stood at the front window of the restaurant, watching early customers approach our entrance, while imagining my parents' faces as they learned the truth in the worst possible way. The reporter would be talking about food poisoning and health department investigations, and somewhere in the middle of that narrative, they would mention that the owner of Marco's Pizzeria was Maya Elizabeth Chen, 28 years old, holder of an MBA from Northwestern University. My phone stayed silent for the first 10 minutes after the broadcast, which somehow felt worse than if it had been ringing constantly. Were they too shocked to call? Too angry? Were they trying to process the information? Or were they doubting what they'd heard? Kevin appeared at my shoulder, his voice gentle. "Miss Chen, our first customers are here. Should I seat them?" I forced myself to focus on the present moment. Whatever was happening in my parents' living room, I had a restaurant to run and people to serve. Yes, seat them. And Kevin, tonight, no matter what else is going on, we make sure every single customer has an extraordinary experience. The next hour passed in a carefully controlled chaos of grand opening service. Despite everything happening in Los Angeles, despite the stress of waiting for my parents' call, despite the financial crisis looming over the entire business, the Chicago team performed flawlessly. Orders flowed from the kitchen, servers moved with practiced efficiency, and customers seemed genuinely delighted with both the food and the atmosphere. I found myself moving through the dining room like a ghost, checking on tables and solving small problems, while my mind remained split between the present moment and the phone call I was dreading. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip, but it was always David with updates from Los Angeles, or suppliers with questions about orders. At 7:15 p.m., just as I was starting to wonder if my parents were going to call at all, my phone finally rang with my mother's number. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, my hands shaking as I answered, "Mom?" Maya. Her voice was flat, emotionless in a way that scared me more than anger would have. We watched the news. I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why we've been worrying about our daughter, who we thought was struggling to make ends meet as a pizza delivery driver, while she actually owns a chain of 17 restaurants? Can you explain why you let us offer to pay for graduate school when you already have a graduate degree and a successful business? Can you explain why you've been lying to us for 3 years? The words hit me like physical blows, each one perfectly aimed at the guilt I'd been carrying. Mom, I wasn't lying exactly. You were just what, Maya? Just protecting us from the truth? Just letting us think we'd failed as parents? Just allowing us to spend 3 years wondering where we went wrong with our daughter? I could hear my father in the background, his voice too low to make out the words, but carrying the same tone of hurt and bewilderment. My mother continued, and now there were tears in her voice that made everything worse. Do you know what the hardest part was? Not the worry about your future, not the embarrassment when people asked about your career. The hardest part was thinking that somehow we hadn't given you the confidence to reach for more. That maybe we'd been too careful, too focused on security, and we'd raised a daughter who was afraid to take risks. Mom, you didn't... But that wasn't the problem at all, was it? You were taking enormous risks. You were building something incredible. You just didn't trust us enough to tell us about it. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I realized that all my careful reasoning about protecting them and timing and making sure the business was stable before I revealed it, none of that mattered now. What mattered was that I had chosen to carry the secret alone, and in doing so, I had denied them the chance to be proud of me, to support me, to be part of the journey. "You're right," I said, the words coming out in a rush. I was scared that if I told you I was trying to build something big and then it failed, I would have disappointed you twice, once for trying and once for failing. I thought it was better to let you think I was just drifting than to risk having you watch me crash and burn. And what about now, Maya? This news report talked about people getting sick, investigations, potential lawsuits. Is this business that we're just learning about already crashing and burning? The question cut deep, because it hit so close to the truth. I don't know, Mom. We're dealing with a serious crisis right now, and I honestly don't know if the business is going to survive. But I was going to tell you everything this week anyway, before any of this happened. I was planning to what? Planning to finally trust your parents with the truth about your life? I looked through the restaurant window where my staff was seamlessly handling the dinner rush, where customers were laughing and enjoying food that I had created recipes for, where the Chicago location I'd built as a love letter to my parents was succeeding beyond my wildest hopes. The red-eye flight from Chicago to Los Angeles felt like traveling through a time warp, each hour bringing me closer to a reckoning I wasn't sure I was prepared for. While my fellow passengers slept, I stared out at the darkness below and tried to process the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. My parents knew everything now, the success, the crisis, the years of deception, and somehow, impossibly, they were on my side. But knowing I had their support and knowing I could save the business they now understood I'd built were two very different things. I landed at LAX at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time, my body running on adrenaline and airplane coffee. David was waiting for me at baggage claim, looking like he hadn't slept since our last conversation. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled, his tie askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes that told the story of a crisis that had continued to escalate in my absence. "How bad is it?" I asked without preamble as we walked toward the parking garage. "Bad. Really bad, but not hopeless." He handed me a thick folder of documents. The health department finished their preliminary investigation. The good news is that they've identified the source of the contamination. It was a single batch of spinach from our produce supplier that tested positive for E. coli. The bad news is that it went to 4 of our locations, not just Manhattan Beach.
My heart sank. 4 locations? How many people? 37 confirmed cases, 12 hospitalizations. But Maya, here's the thing. Our response has been textbook perfect. We immediately cooperated with the investigation, provided all documentation, closed the affected locations voluntarily before being asked, and our insurance is covering all medical expenses without argument. The health department investigators are actually using us as an example of how businesses should handle this kind of crisis. I felt a flicker of hope. So we're not looking at criminal charges or punitive action? No. If anything, our proactive response has impressed them. But the public relations damage is still severe. We've had 3 major suppliers terminate their contracts, 2 landlords invoke morality clauses to try to break our leases, and online orders across all locations have dropped by 60%. As we drove through the empty, pre-dawn streets of Los Angeles, David continued to brief me on the crisis management efforts that had consumed his last 3 days. The picture that emerged was of a business under siege, facing attacks from multiple directions, but not yet mortally wounded. The question was whether we could stabilize the situation before the accumulated damage became irreversible. "What's our cash position?" I asked, dreading the answer. "If we can reopen the closed locations within 2 weeks and get online orders back to at least 70% of normal within a month, we'll be fine. If this drags on longer than that," he shrugged, "we'd have to start looking at selling locations to cover operating expenses." The irony wasn't lost on me that just as my parents had learned to be proud of what I'd built here, I might have to start dismantling it piece by piece to survive. We arrived at the office building just as the sun was painting the sky pink and gold over downtown LA. At 6:30 a.m., the place should have been empty, but I could see lights on in our 20th floor offices. As we rode the elevator up, David explained that the crisis management team had been working around the clock, coordinating with health officials, insurance investigators, lawyers, and public relations specialists. The office buzzed with the controlled chaos of people fighting for something they believed in. My employees, people I hired and trained and worked alongside for years, had turned our conference room into a war room, with whiteboards covered in timelines and action items, laptops scattered across every surface, and the kind of focused energy that only comes from a team united by shared purpose. Maria, my head of operations, looked up from her computer as I walked in. "Maya, thank God you're back. We've got the health department report, the insurance adjuster's preliminary findings, and a stack of legal documents that need your signature." She paused, studying my face. "How did it go in Chicago, with your parents?" The question surprised me. In the middle of fighting for the survival of the business, she was asking about my personal life. It reminded me why I started this company in the first place, not just to build something successful, but to build something that felt like a family. I said it went better than I expected. They know everything now, and they're proud of what we've built here, which means we need to make sure there's still something to be proud of. The next several hours passed in a blur of conference calls, document reviews, and strategic planning sessions. The health department agreed to allow us to reopen the closed locations on Monday, provided we implemented additional safety protocols and submitted 2 unscheduled inspections for the next 6 months. Our insurance company confirmed they would cover not only the medical expenses, but also business interruption losses, though the claims process would take months to resolve fully. But the most important breakthrough came from an unexpected source. At 2 p.m., as I was reviewing supplier contracts in my office, my assistant knocked on the door with an unusual expression. "Maya, there's a reporter here from the Los Angeles Times. She says she's been investigating the story about Marco's Pizzeria, and she has some information you need to see." My stomach dropped. More negative press coverage was the last thing we needed. "Tell her we're not giving interviews right now."
"She's not here for an interview. She says she's here to help." The reporter turned out to be Jessica Martinez, a veteran investigative journalist who specialized in food safety and business accountability. She was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of direct manner that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Miss Chen, I've been following your company's response to this crisis, and I have to say, it's been impressive. But more importantly, I've been investigating your produce supplier, and I think you're going to want to see what I've found." She spread out a collection of documents on my desk: health department reports, supplier inspection records, and what appeared to be internal emails from the produce company. "Your spinach supplier, Valley Fresh Produce, has had contamination issues before. 3 times in the past 2 years, in fact. But they've been covering it up, settling with affected restaurants quietly to avoid public health investigations. I stared at the documents, trying to process what she was telling me. Are you saying this wasn't just bad luck? I'm saying your supplier knew they had systemic problems with their safety protocols, and they continued to sell potentially contaminated produce to restaurants across Southern California. You're not the villain in this story, Miss Chen. You're another victim. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Can you prove this? I can, and I'm going to. My article runs tomorrow, and it's going to shift the entire narrative around this crisis. Instead of being the restaurant chain that poisoned customers, Marco's Pizzeria is going to be the company that was betrayed by a negligent supplier, but handled the crisis with complete integrity. After Jessica left, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the city where my restaurant served thousands of customers every week. The vindication should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt like exhaustion. For 4 days, I'd been carrying the weight of responsibility for something that wasn't entirely my fault, and the relief of that burden lifting was overwhelming. David knocked on my door around 4 p.m. Maya, I just got off the phone with Valley Fresh Produce. Apparently, they've seen an advance copy of tomorrow's Times article. They want to settle. Settle what? Everything. Medical expenses, business interruption losses, punitive damages for the cover-up. They're talking about a number with 8 digits. I laughed, but it came out sounding like a sob. 8 digits, David? 12 hours ago, we were talking about selling locations to stay solvent. And now we're talking about expanding faster than we ever imagined possible. Maya, this settlement doesn't just solve our current crisis, it gives us the capital to accelerate our growth plans by years. The phone on my desk rang, and I saw it was my parents calling from Chicago. I'd been so consumed with crisis management that I'd barely thought about them since landing, but apparently they'd been following the news coverage throughout the day. Maya, Beta, we just saw the news about your supplier. Are you okay? Are you safe? The concern in her voice, not about the business, not about money or success, but about my well-being, made my eyes fill with tears. I'm okay, Mom. We're gonna be okay. It turns out this whole thing wasn't our fault after all. We never thought it was your fault. My father's voice came through the speaker. Maya, your mother and I have been talking, and we want you to know something. Even if this crisis had destroyed your business, even if you'd lost everything, we would still be proud of you. Dad, let me finish. We're proud of you for how you've handled this situation. We're proud of you for taking care of your employees when your own future was uncertain. We're proud of you for building something that matters enough to fight for. Success is good, Beta, but character is everything. After we hung up, I walked out into the main office where my team was still working, even though the immediate crisis had passed and vindication was coming in tomorrow's newspaper. They could have gone home, could have celebrated, could have taken a break from the intensity of the past week. Instead, they were already working on plans for rebuilding and moving forward.
Maria looked up as I approached. Maya, we've been thinking about next steps. If we're going to get a significant settlement from Valley Fresh, and if the Times article clears our reputation, we should be ready to capitalize on the opportunity. Public sympathy, combined with renewed confidence in our safety protocols, could actually make us stronger than we were before this happened. Kevin's voice came through on a conference call from Chicago. The response to last night's opening has been incredible. We've got reservations booked solid for the next 2 weeks, and 3 different food bloggers want to feature us. People are driving from all over the city to try us out. I looked around at these people who had believed in me and the business we'd built together, who had fought alongside me when everything was falling apart, who were already looking ahead to new possibilities instead of dwelling on what we'd almost lost. All right, I said, let's talk about what comes next. The strategic planning session that followed felt like the inverse of the crisis meetings we'd been having all week. Instead of discussing how to minimize damage, we were talking about how to maximize opportunity. Instead of wondering if we'd survive, we were debating how fast we could grow. The settlement from Valley Fresh would give us the capital to open 15 new locations within the next year. The positive press coverage would make investors eager to partner with us on expansion into new markets.
The rigorous safety protocols we'd implemented in response to the crisis would become a competitive advantage, setting us apart from other restaurant chains. But the most significant change was harder to quantify. We'd been tested in the most public and stressful way possible, and we'd emerged stronger, not just financially, but as a team, as a company culture, as a group of people who knew we could count on each other when everything was on the line. As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the office windows gold and orange, I realized that the crisis that had threatened to destroy everything I'd built had actually become the catalyst for taking it to the next level. More importantly, it had forced me to stop hiding my success and start sharing it with the people who mattered most. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Maya, your father and I drove past your restaurant again today. There was a line of customers waiting to get in. We stood across the street and watched for a while, and we kept telling people that our daughter owns this place. We're so proud we can't contain ourselves." I showed the text to David, who grinned. "You know what this means, right?" "What?" "No more Tuesday night delivery shifts. No more hiding who you are. No more pretending to be someone smaller than you actually are." He was right. The red polo shirt hanging in my closet, the symbol of all my deception and self-doubt, would never be worn again. Not because I was too good for that work, but because I'd finally learned that being proud of what you've built doesn't require hiding from where you came from. At 8 p.m., as the office finally started to empty out, I made one more call to Chicago. "Mom, it's me. I wanted you to know that everything's going to be okay. Better than okay, actually." "We never doubted it," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Maya, when are you coming back to Chicago? Your father wants to take you to dinner at your own restaurant." "Soon," I said. "Very soon. But Mom, next time I come home, I'm not going to be sneaking around or making excuses or hiding who I am. I'm coming home as your daughter who built something she's proud of, something you can be proud of too." "Beta, we've always been proud of you. We just needed you to be proud of yourself too."
As I hung up and looked around the office that had been a battlefield just hours earlier, I realized she was absolutely right. The recognition I'd been seeking, the validation I'd thought I needed from others, had been there all along. I'd just been too afraid to claim it. The crisis was over. The hiding was over. And for the first time in years, I was ready to be exactly who I'd always been, Maya Chen, daughter of immigrants, who had built something extraordinary from nothing and was finally proud enough to own it. 3 weeks later, my parents flew to Los Angeles for the grand reopening of our Manhattan Beach location. As they cut the ribbon alongside me, cameras flashing and employees cheering, my mother squeezed my hand and whispered, "We always knew you were building something special, Beta. We just needed you to know it too." The red polo shirt still hangs in my closet, but now it represents something different. Not shame or deception, but the reminder that success means nothing if you're too afraid to share it with the people who matter most. Tomorrow, the Los Angeles Times would tell the world that Maya Elizabeth Chen wasn't just another restaurateur who had gotten unlucky with a bad supplier. She was an entrepreneur who had built something meaningful, handled a crisis with integrity, and emerged stronger than before. But tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't need external validation to know who I was. I was Maya Chen, daughter of immigrants, business owner, employer of hundreds, and finally, someone who was proud of what she'd accomplished and ready to build something even bigger. The crisis was over. The hiding was over. The real work was just beginning. In 30 minutes, I would deliver the keynote address at the National Restaurant Association's annual conference, speaking to 3,000 industry professionals about crisis management, corporate responsibility, and the power of authentic leadership. The invitation had come as a surprise, even though Marco's Pizzeria had become something of a legend in the industry. We'd not only survived the supplier contamination crisis, but had used it as a catalyst for unprecedented growth. The settlement from Valley Fresh Produce had funded an expansion that took us from 17 locations to 42 in just 6 months, with plans to reach 75 by the end of the year. But numbers only told part of the story. The real transformation had been cultural, both within the company and in how the business community viewed ethical leadership in crisis situations.
Harvard Business School had developed a case study around our response. UCLA had invited me to teach a semester-long course on entrepreneurship and crisis management. 3 different publishers had approached me about writing a book on building businesses with integrity. More importantly, my parents had become my most enthusiastic supporters and advisors. The relationship that had been strained by years of deception had been rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty and mutual respect. They'd even invested some of their retirement savings in the company's expansion, becoming minority shareholders in the business they'd once thought was beneath their daughter's potential. "Maya, you look nervous," David said, approaching from the conference registration desk. He'd been promoted to Chief Operating Officer 3 months earlier, a recognition of his steady leadership during our darkest moments. "Remember, these are your peers. They're here because they want to learn from what we accomplished." "I know," I said, checking my phone for any last-minute messages. "It's just surreal. 2 years ago, I was sneaking around in delivery uniforms because I was afraid to own my success. Now I'm supposed to be teaching other people how to lead." "Maya, can I tell you something?" David's voice was serious, the tone he used when he had something important to say. "The person who was afraid to own her success 2 years ago is the same person who built a business worth owning. The humility that made you work delivery shifts, the caution that made you want to be absolutely sure before claiming victory, those weren't weaknesses. They were the foundation of everything good about this company." Before I could respond, a young woman approached us hesitantly. She looked to be in her mid-20s, professionally dressed but with the kind of nervous energy that reminded me of myself when I'd first started out. The success was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But with each expansion, I felt myself getting further away from the core of what had made it all work in the first place. The direct connection with customers, the immediate feedback, the pure satisfaction of watching someone's face light up when they tasted something truly exceptional. That's why I work delivery shifts, to stay connected to the heart of what I'd built. My parents thought it was evidence of my complete lack of ambition. "Still delivering pizzas, I see," my father had said during our last conversation 3 weeks ago. His voice carried the particular flatness that comes from years of accumulated disappointment. "Maya, you're almost 30. When are you going to grow up and get serious about your future?" I'd been standing in my office, looking out at the city where my restaurants were busy with the dinner rush when he said those words. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Instead, I'd felt that familiar twist in my stomach, the one that came from being simultaneously proud of everything I'd accomplished and heartbroken that the people who mattered most couldn't see any of it. Tonight was Tuesday again, which meant it was uniform time. I selected a location I hadn't visited in a while, the Westwood shop near UCLA, always busy with college students who appreciated both quality and value. As I tied my hair back and grabbed my car keys, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. Just another pizza delivery girl, nothing special to look at. My parents would have seen exactly what they expected to see. Their daughter still playing dress-up in a job that was beneath her education and their sacrifices. What they couldn't see was the quiet confidence in my eyes, the way I carried myself like someone who had built something meaningful from scratch. They couldn't see the stack of lease agreements on my desk for the next wave of expansion, or the business plan for going nationwide that kept me up at night with excitement rather than worry. They couldn't see that every time I put on this uniform, I wasn't stepping down. I was stepping into the heart of everything I'd created. The drive to Westwood took me through neighborhoods where 3 of my other locations were busy with the dinner rush. I could have stopped at any of them, could have walked in as the owner and been greeted with the kind of respect that comes with signing paychecks. Instead, I pulled up to the Westwood location like any other delivery driver, reporting for a shift, ready to spend the evening doing exactly what my parents thought was a waste of my life. The manager, Jessica, greeted me with a smile and handed me the night's delivery schedule. She knew who I really was, of course, but she also understood the importance of these undercover shifts. "Busy night ahead," she said, treating me exactly like any other part-time driver. Got a big order for a sorority house and 3 separate deliveries to the same apartment complex. You ready for this? I was more than ready. I was home. The first delivery of the night was to a graduate student who answered the door in pajama pants and a stress-wrinkled t-shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw the pizza, his whole face transformed. "Oh my God, you're a lifesaver," he said, and I could tell he meant it literally. "I've been working on my dissertation for 14 hours straight. This might be the first real food I've eaten all day." That moment, that pure, uncomplicated gratitude for something as simple as hot food delivered to your door, was why I did this. Not for the money, though the business was more profitable than my parents could have imagined. Not for the recognition, though the industry awards were starting to pile up. I did it for moments like this, when something I'd built from nothing could make someone's impossible day just a little bit better. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the phone call I'd have with my parents this weekend. The same disappointed questions, the same gentle suggestions that I consider real career opportunities, the same unspoken wondering about where they'd gone wrong with their daughter. But tonight, I was just Maya, the delivery driver, carrying boxes of carefully crafted pizza through the streets of Los Angeles, building something bigger than they could see, one satisfied customer at a time. When they called to check in, as they did every Sunday evening without fail, I would sit in my penthouse apartment and tell them about my delivery shifts while looking out at a city where my restaurants fed thousands of families every night.
I told them the truth, she said with a smile, that we didn't raise an entrepreneur. We raised a daughter who cares about people and isn't afraid of hard work. The entrepreneurship just followed naturally from that. As we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside. "Maya, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Always, Dad." "Are you happy? Not successful, not accomplished, not famous. Are you happy?" It was the same question my mother had asked months earlier, but my answer was different now. "Yes, Dad, I'm happy. Not because everything always goes well, but because I wake up every day knowing that what I'm doing matters. I'm building something that will last, something that takes care of people, something that makes the world a little bit better." He nodded, satisfied. "That's all your mother and I ever wanted for you. Success is good, but happiness is everything." "Miss Chen, I wanted to thank you personally for how you handled that crisis earlier this year," he said as we sat in his living room. "My wife has been sick, and restaurant meals are sometimes the only cooking we can manage. When all that news came out about the contamination, we were scared to order from anywhere. But the way you took responsibility, the way you made sure everyone was taken care of, it showed us that there are still businesses out there that put people first. That means a lot to hear, Mr. Peterson. Can I tell you why it matters so much to me?" He gestured to a photo on the mantle. "I spent 40 years working for a company that got bigger and bigger until eventually the people at the top didn't know or care about the people at the bottom. When I retired, they eliminated my department and outsourced the work to save money, without thinking about the customers who would be affected." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What you've built is different. It still feels personal, like the people making decisions actually care about the people affected by those decisions. Don't let anyone take that away from you." That night, I called David and told him my decision. We're not selling. "Maya, are you sure? This is a life-changing amount of money." "David, I've already changed my life. I don't need someone else's money to validate what we've built. And I'm not willing to risk losing what makes this company special just to make it bigger." Instead of selling to the conglomerate, we used their interest as leverage to secure a massive expansion loan from our bank. The publicity around the potential acquisition had increased our valuation significantly, making lenders eager to fund our growth plans. Over the following months, we opened new locations in San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle.
We launched a catering division that focused on corporate events and large gatherings. We even started a consulting service, helping other restaurant chains develop crisis management protocols and build customer-focused cultures. But perhaps most importantly, we established the Marcos Foundation, using a portion of our profits to support young entrepreneurs from immigrant families. The foundation provided microloans, mentorship, and business development resources to help the next generation of dreamers turn their ideas into reality. A year later, I found myself back on a stage, but this time it was at the White House. President Biden had invited me to participate in a roundtable discussion on small business development and economic recovery. As I sat in the Roosevelt Room listening to other entrepreneurs share their stories, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I thought about the scared young woman who had started with a food truck and a dream, about the daughter who had been too afraid to tell her parents about her success, about the business owner who had faced her worst crisis and discovered what she was really made of. But mostly I thought about legacy, not the kind that gets written in business magazines or celebrated at award ceremonies, but the kind that lives in the lives of people whose opportunities expanded because of choices you made, whose dreams became possible because you proved it could be done. That evening, I flew back to Los Angeles and drove straight to the original Marcos location in Silver Lake. It was past 10 p.m., well after closing time, but I let myself in and walked through the empty dining room where it all began. The space looked different now. We'd expanded and renovated several times, but it still felt like home. This was where I learned that success wasn't about getting big as fast as possible, but about building something sustainable, something that could weather storms and adapt to challenges while never losing sight of the values that made it worth building in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Maya, we saw you on the news at the White House. Dad keeps rewinding the part where you talked about immigrant families and entrepreneurship. We are so proud of who you've become." As I locked up the restaurant and walked to my car, I realized that the story I'd been telling myself for years, about needing to prove my worth, about having to choose between success and authenticity, and about the danger of dreaming too big, had been completely wrong. The truth was simpler and more powerful. When you build something that matters to you, when you lead with integrity, and when you never forget that business is ultimately about serving people, success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. And the best part? The story was far from over. It was just the foundation for whatever came next.
10 years after that first terrifying phone call from David about the food poisoning crisis, I sat in my office at Harvard Business School preparing for what would be my final lecture as a full-time professor. At 58, I wasn't retiring. I was evolving again, this time into a role that would allow me to focus entirely on the Marcos Global Initiative, our expanded foundation that now operated in 12 countries and had supported over 10,000 entrepreneurs worldwide. The past decade had been a masterclass in the power of compound impact. Marco's Pizzeria had grown to over 300 locations, but more importantly, it had spawned an entire ecosystem of values-driven businesses. The Marcos model, combining profitability with social responsibility, treating employees as partners, and viewing crisis as opportunity, had been studied, replicated, and adapted by entrepreneurs across dozens of industries. But the real legacy wasn't in the businesses themselves. It was in the people whose lives had been transformed by the belief that they could build something meaningful, that their dreams were worthy of support, and that success could be a force for good in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim, whose food safety company had grown into a global operation with offices in 15 countries. "Maya, just wanted you to know that our technology prevented another major contamination outbreak this week. A restaurant chain in Brazil caught a supplier issue before any customers were affected. Your investment in our dream is still saving lives 10 years later." Messages like this arrive daily now, updates from entrepreneurs whose businesses had grown far beyond what any of us had initially imagined possible. The ripple effect had become a tsunami of positive impact that continued to expand in ways I couldn't have anticipated.
There was Marcus Williams, the former military veterans whose mobile food truck business had grown into a nationwide network of restaurants specifically designed to employ and train other veterans transitioning to civilian careers. There was Elena Rodriguez, whose sustainable farming operation had transformed agricultural practices across Central America while providing economic opportunities for women in rural communities. There was David Park, whose social media platform for small businesses had democratized marketing in ways that allowed immigrant entrepreneurs to compete with established corporations. Each of these success stories had generated its own network of supported businesses, creating an exponential pattern of growth and impact that stretched across continents and cultures. What had begun as my personal struggle to balance ambition with authenticity had become a global movement proving that business could be both profitable and purposeful. The transformation in my family had been equally remarkable. My parents, now in their 80s but still sharp and engaged, had become internationally recognized figures in the entrepreneurship world. My mother's book, Threading Success: A Seamstress's Guide to Building Dreams, had been translated into 12 languages and was required reading in several business schools. My father's methodical approach to sustainable growth had become the foundation for a consulting practice that helped established businesses transition to more ethical operations. But perhaps most importantly, they had become the wise elders of our extended business family, the people that young entrepreneurs turned to when they needed perspective, encouragement, or simply the reassurance that comes from talking to someone who has navigated similar challenges and emerged stronger. This morning's lecture would be attended not just by my current students, but by dozens of alumni who had requested permission to return for my farewell address. The topic was one I'd been thinking about for months: the evolution of impact, from personal success to systemic change. As I walked across Harvard's campus, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The scared young woman who had hidden her achievements from her own parents would barely recognize the person I'd become, someone comfortable with visibility, confident in her ability to create positive change, and convinced that the most important victories are the ones that enable others to win as well.
When I started Marco's Pizzeria 20 years ago, I thought success would look like a certain number of restaurants, a specific revenue figure, maybe some industry recognition. I was thinking about success as something you achieve and then possess. I paused, making eye contact with students throughout the room. What I've learned is that real success isn't something you possess, it's something you create continuously by using whatever you've built to build up others. It's not a destination you reach, but a responsibility you accept. I spent the next hour sharing stories from my journey, but more importantly, stories from the journeys of entrepreneurs who had been supported by our foundation and investment fund. I talked about the compound effect of values-driven leadership, the way ethical business practices create trust that generates sustainable competitive advantages, and the mathematical reality that lifting others ultimately lifts yourself. But the heart of the lecture was about something more fundamental: the recognition that in an interconnected world, individual success that doesn't contribute to collective progress is ultimately hollow and unsustainable. Your generation faces challenges that require entrepreneurial solutions, I told the students. Climate change, economic inequality, social justice, global health crises, these aren't problems that can be solved by the government alone or by traditional nonprofit approaches. They require innovative businesses led by people who understand that profit and purpose are not opposing forces, but complementary ones. After the lecture, during the reception that followed, I found myself in conversation after conversation with students whose ambitions reminded me of my younger self. But there was something different about this generation of entrepreneurs. They seemed instinctively understand that business success and social impact were inseparable, that building something meaningful required considering the effects on all stakeholders, not just shareholders. One student, Jennifer Miu, approached me with a business plan that perfectly captured this evolution in thinking. She had developed a platform that connected small-scale farmers in developing countries directly with restaurants in major cities, eliminating middlemen while ensuring fair prices for producers and fresh, traceable ingredients for chefs. "Professor Chen,"
I've been inspired by your model of using business success to support other entrepreneurs. My platform isn't just about efficient food distribution, it's about creating economic opportunities for farming communities while helping restaurants differentiate themselves through authentic sustainability practices. As I reviewed her business plan, I saw echoes of my own journey, but also innovations I never could have imagined. Her use of blockchain technology to ensure transparency, her integration of carbon offset programs, her partnership with microfinance organizations to provide farming equipment loans. These were solutions that address systemic problems while creating profitable, scalable businesses. Jennifer, this is exactly the kind of thinking that will define successful entrepreneurship in the coming decades. You're not just building a business, you're building a more equitable system. 3 months later, the Marcos Global Initiative announced its largest single investment to date, a $50 million commitment to Jennifer's platform, along with mentorship support and access to our network of restaurant partners worldwide. Within 18 months, her platform was operating in 27 countries and had increased average farmer incomes by 40% while reducing food costs for participating restaurants. But Jennifer's success was just one example of the acceleration that was happening across our entire portfolio. The combination of patient capital, expert mentorship, and network effects was allowing social entrepreneurs to scale solutions to global problems at unprecedented speed. The transformation was happening at Marco's Pizzeria itself as well. Under David's leadership as CEO, the company had become a laboratory for innovative business practices. We'd achieved carbon neutrality across all locations 5 years ahead of our target date. We'd implemented profit-sharing programs that had turned thousands of employees into stakeholders with real economic ownership in the company's success. We'd pioneered supply chain transparency practices that allowed customers to trace every ingredient back to its source.
The business had become living proof of something I'd always believed but had taken years to fully understand. Doing good and doing well weren't competing objectives, but mutually reinforcing strategies for sustainable success. As I prepared to transition into my new role, leading the global initiative full-time, I found myself returning frequently to the Chicago location where my parents had first seen what I'd built. The restaurant had become something of a pilgrimage site for young entrepreneurs, a place where people came to understand that success stories often begin with someone willing to bridge the gap between who they are and who they might become. On one such visit, I overheard a conversation between two college students who had driven from Northwestern to see the restaurant they'd read about in their entrepreneurship class. "I can't believe she started with just one food truck," one of them was saying. "And now look at all this. But more than that, look at all the other businesses she's helped create. It's like she figured out how to make success multiply." Her friend nodded thoughtfully. "My professor said the really interesting thing is that she almost gave up before she even started because she was afraid her parents wouldn't understand. Like, she let fear of disappointing people keep her from building something that would make them proud." "That's the part I relate to," the first student replied. "My parents want me to be a doctor, but I have this idea for a social impact startup. I keep thinking I should wait until I'm more established to pursue it." I found myself walking over to their table, drawn by the familiar nature of their conversation. "Excuse me," I said. "I couldn't help overhearing your discussion. I'm Maya Chen." Their faces registered shock, then excitement, then something approaching reverence that made me laugh. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to share something with you about fear and timing. I spent 3 years of my life hiding my success from the people I loved most because I was afraid they wouldn't understand or support my choices. What I learned is that the people who love you are usually more ready to celebrate your dreams than you think. But more importantly, I learned that waiting for the perfect moment to pursue something meaningful means you'll wait forever." I sat down with them for the next hour, sharing stories from my journey and listening to their plans and concerns.
By the time I left, they had committed to presenting their business ideas to their parents within the month, and they'd exchanged contact information to support each other through the process. 6 months later, I received an email from one of them. She had successfully launched her social impact startup with her parents' financial and emotional support, and her Northwestern classmate was finishing his pre-med requirements while developing a healthcare technology company on the side. These conversations, happening thousands of times across the world, represented the real legacy of what we'd built. Not just successful businesses, but a cultural shift toward understanding entrepreneurship as a tool for positive change, toward seeing business as a means of serving others rather than just serving yourself. The formal announcement of my transition to leading the global initiative full-time came during Marco's Pizzeria's 20th anniversary celebration. We held the event simultaneously across all our locations, with live video connections allowing employees, customers, and community partners to participate in a global conversation about the future of business and social impact. David, now a seasoned CEO who had successfully navigated the company through 2 decades of growth and change, introduced me with words that captured the evolution of our partnership and our shared mission. 20 years ago, Chen had a dream about building a better kind of restaurant business. But what she actually built was something much more important. A demonstration that success and service aren't competing objectives, but mutually reinforcing strategies for sustainable success. As I took the stage to address our global audience, I looked out at faces representing every continent, dozens of languages, and countless stories of dreams realized through hard work, mutual support, and unwavering commitment to doing well by doing good. Marco's story began with a simple belief that if you create something people genuinely need, if you treat everyone involved with dignity and respect, and if you never forget that business exists to serve communities rather than the other way around, you can build something that lasts.
Jenny, I said when my cousin answered the phone. Jenny Liu was the success story of our extended family, the lawyer my mother was always comparing me to, the daughter who had followed the traditional path to respectability and achievement. Maya, what a surprise! How are you doing? Not great, I said, and before I knew it, the whole story was pouring out of me. The business, the deception, the Chicago restaurant, the food poisoning outbreak, the impossible timing of everything falling apart just as I was finally ready to tell the truth. Jenny listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Maya, I have to ask, why didn't you tell them sooner? Why let them worry for 3 years? It was the question I'd been asking myself, and I still didn't have a good answer. Because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Because I thought they'd assume I was lying to make them feel better. Because I wanted to be absolutely sure I could sustain the success before I claimed it. And now? Now, I don't know if there's going to be anything left to sustain. Maya, listen to me. I've been the family success story for 10 years now, and I can tell you something that might surprise you. Every single one of our relatives, including your parents, talks about how proud they are of your courage. I laughed bitterly. My courage to waste my MBA on pizza delivery? Your courage to chase something that mattered to you instead of taking the safe path. Your courage to build something from nothing, even when everyone around you thought you were making a mistake. Do you think they don't see that? Do you think they're not proud of you for following your dreams, even if they don't understand what those dreams are? They said I was wasting my life. They said that because they love you and they're scared for your future. But Maya, they raised you. They know who you are. Deep down, they know you're not the kind of person who would actually waste 3 years of her life. They're worried about you, but they also trust you more than you realize. Even if that's true, I said, it doesn't solve my current problem. By tomorrow night, they're going to see their daughter's name in the news connected to a food poisoning scandal. How do I explain that? The same way you explain everything else, Jenny said simply, with the truth. All of it. The success, the restaurants, the years of building something amazing, and yes, the crisis too. Because this is what real business owners do, Maya.
They solve problems and take responsibility and fight for what they've built. Your parents will understand that, even if they don't understand pizza. After we hung up, I looked around the restaurant one more time. In 36 hours, assuming I could keep the opening on schedule, despite the crisis in Los Angeles, this place would be full of customers trying my food and deciding whether the Chen family daughter had built something worth supporting. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to David, telling him I would be back in Los Angeles first thing Saturday morning, after the Chicago opening. The second was to my parents. Mom, it's Maya. I need to ask you and Dad to do something for me. Of course, Beta. What do you need? Tomorrow night, I need you both to watch Channel 7 News. There's going to be a story about my work. And after you watch it, I need you to call me. We're going to have a long conversation about some things I should have told you a long time ago. Maya, you're scaring me. What kind of story? The kind that's going to explain everything. Mom, I want you to remember that whatever you see on the news, whatever questions it raises, I love you and Dad more than anything in the world. And everything I've done because you taught me that work is dignity and that building something meaningful is worth any sacrifice. Maya, just watch the news, Mom, and then call me. I promise everything will make sense after that. As I hung up, I realized that the crisis had solved one problem as it created a dozen others. I no longer had to figure out how to reveal my success to my parents. The news would do that for me, in the most dramatic and terrifying way possible. Now all I had to do was make sure there was still a business worth being proud of when the dust settled.
As my plane lifted off from Chicago's O'Hare Airport, carrying me back to Boston and the next phase of my journey, I looked down at the city lights below and thought about all the dreams taking shape in offices and kitchens and dorm rooms across the world. Dreams of young people who believed they could build something meaningful, who understood that business could be a force for good, who were ready to prove that success was most satisfying when it was shared. The story that had begun with a food truck and a frightened young woman was now bigger than any one person or company. It has become part of the ongoing story of human potential, of what becomes possible when people dare to dream beyond their circumstances and work to make those dreams reality, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. And the best part? That story was still being written by thousands of entrepreneurs around the world who had learned that the most sustainable success is the kind that lifts others up, that the most profitable businesses are those that serve their communities, and that the most meaningful legacy is the one that helps others create their own. If Maya's story inspired you, show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs motivation, and subscribing for more incredible stories of triumph against all odds. The plane climbed through the clouds toward Boston, carrying me toward tomorrow and all the possibilities it held. Behind me, in Chicago and Los Angeles and dozens of other cities, the restaurants that had started this journey were serving their final customers of the day. Families and friends gathering around tables, sharing meals and stories and plans for the future. Somewhere among those customers was surely another young dreamer, another person with an idea that seemed too big for their circumstances. Another future entrepreneur who needed to learn that success was not just possible, but inevitable when built on the foundation of service to others. The story would continue. The ripple effect would expand. The dream would evolve and grow and touch lives in ways none of us could yet imagine. And that was exactly as it should be.